Hey, my name's Sam Gillett, and welcome to my Strathmore Artist Workshop, all about how to add color to vibrant and immersive pen drawings. In each different lesson in the workshop, I'll go over exactly what supplies I'm using, what you'll need to complete the project, and then step by step through 4 different drawings. Each one will only take up, half a page of your sketchbook and probably less than 45 minutes of your time. The whole goal of this workshop is to hopefully make drawing with pen a little bit less intimidating and make adding color to your pen drawings to give them a little bit more life and vibrancy easy and intuitive. In each lesson, you'll also have the chance to dig deeper into the techniques of pen drawing at the end of the project. We'll have a chance to go back over the drawing we've done, add detail, texture, shading, and some more complicated pen techniques. So if you have extra time, feel free to stay on longer at the end of each lesson to dig a little deeper into the techniques we talk about. So first, let's dive into painting with acrylic ink paints and then adding ink over top to add details and to set the scene a little bit. So let's talk about the supplies that you'll need to complete this project. The most important thing is having a good sketchbook. And for this project, I'm using a Strathmore tone tanned mixed media sketchbook with a lovely vellum surface. And this one has a very thick paper that'll take the acrylic ink well without making the paper warp. You can see how the paint here on the front has not leaked through to the back. As well, you'll notice that it's kind of an off-white. It's a beige toned paper. This is really effective at making acrylic ink paint kind of jump off the page by having a nice contrast with the paints that we put on it. For acrylic ink paints, I'm using Daler-Rowney Acrylic Ink for this class. Acrylic ink is a lot different than watercolor because you can paint over top of it. So for instance, I can lay down this blue and then paint white or green or any other color on top to create really cool layers. Whereas with watercolor, it's really hard to create layers because the paint is so translucent. You'll also need some brushes to complete this project. And I'm using Princeton Select shaders and a larger brush as well. And so this Princeton Select one will be the main one we use for this project. And so this brush here is a Princeton 3/4 oval mop, and it'll give us a nice base layer without creating the same texture that a blade or a shader brush might give. Now, the texture is really important, so that's why it's important to have both these brushes for this project. The last thing you'll need, or second last thing you'll need, is a Fineliner pen. And this will be what allows us to add a nice overlayer to create some details at the end. And really, this whole workshop is about creating drawings with pen and color. So having a Fineliner pen, doesn't matter what kind, is really important to have. The last couple things you'll need are a mixing surface, but you can use anything, whether it's a little Tupperware lid, anything that you may need. As well, I always have a trusty little mason jar of water because we'll be mixing some paints and adding some water throughout this first lesson, but also for the workshop later on when we talk about watercolor. So we're creating a acrylic ink painting of a ship sailing on the waves, and then we're going to go over it with ink. Now, first what we're going to do is create a base layer, and what we want to use for that is a acrylic ink in indigo blue. And as I said before, I'm using the Daler-Rowney type of paint. So what we're going to do is drop a few drops onto your mixing surface. I'm going to add a little bit of water. And so how I'm going to do that is basically just dipping this larger brush, the oval mop, in the water to get it wet. And then I want to start by just dabbing a little bit of the blue. And you'll notice that these lovely higher quality acrylic ink paints kind of spread so fast and so quickly. And I just grabbed a little bit of it there, but you can see that I really expanded the amount of blue we have in the mixer. Once I have a little bit of water on my brush and a little bit of the blue paint, I'm going to create some lines here on the page. And I'm drawing these lines horizontally, almost in a circle or a half circle shape. Now this base layer is a nice way of kind of setting the tone for this drawing. I want to make sure the top layer of this base layer is relatively flat, and it kind of curves like a half oval underneath. And you'll see when I mixed water with these paints, it makes them a little bit lighter, a little bit more translucent. We're going to be using less and less water as we progress further on in this project. Now what we're going to do is switch to the blade brush, or the angular shader. And again, I'm using the Princeton brand, and I'm going to dab it in to the indigo blue. And this time I want to make sure there's a little bit on the end of the brush, but you'll see that it isn't a whole bunch. I'm not, submersing the brush, just a little bit on the side. And then I'm going to switch to the angular side of the brush to create lines going across the blue section we've created. And it's all right, or actually encouraged, if these lines kind of cross outside the half oval that we created with the mop brush in the beginning. I'm dipping a little bit more paint each time, and you notice that these lines are a little bit darker than the layer below it. It's all right, or actually encouraged, if these lines aren't straight. And you'll see a little bit of waviness actually makes the lines look a lot more like waves. And you guessed it, we're actually creating waves. You want to concentrate on creating these lines of varying lengths, and it's best if they do kind of venture outside that half oval we created. You want to make sure that the oval itself almost becomes hard to see, as these lines really seem to kind of fade away on the outside of the page. You'll notice that the more lines I'm drawing, the more it seems that these little waves are kind of fading into nothingness rather than kind of following the outline of this oval. You'll also notice as I keep drawing these lines, they're getting a little bit darker as less and less of the water that we mixed in kind of points or shows through. Now that we have the base layer and some of these initial lines, we're going to do the same thing but adding different colors. Most water has quite a lot of green in it, especially if it's ocean water, and that green really shines through. So I'm using a Daler-Rowney Sap Green for this. You want something a little bit of a warmer green. So that's why this Sap Green is a little bit darker and warmer. I would use this over this emerald green. I'm going to dab a little bit of the Sap Green, and it's okay if you do it in the same area as the indigo. However, I just want a tiny little bit. So 1 or 2 drops of the dropper is all we need. I'm not going to wash my brush because it's all right if the green and blue mixes together. Actually, it's kind of encouraged. You can grab a little bit of that Sap Green and kind of dab it around on your mixing surface until it mixes a little bit with the blue. And then you're going to do the same thing we just did with the blue, creating some lines. However, it's important to know with the green, you don't want to create lines that are too dark or too close together because we still want blue to be the dominant color. But I'm continuing that practice of expanding outside that half oval to make these shapes appear to kind of recede or fade into nothingness. Again, it's really important that your lines are not straight. A little bit of a curve is really key here to create the texture of water. And you know how there's some areas that are a little bit more obvious in that base layer we did, such as this area right here. That's why I want to really concentrate on this area to add some paint over top to kind of draw the eye away from that more abrupt edge. You know, water is very flowy. We want to replicate that here with what we are painting. So we've added some green over top of this blue base. Now I kind of want to lighten it up a bit. So the final kind of stage before we start drawing in the boat is going to be adding some lighter colors. I'm going to use the Daler-Rowney fluorescent blue, and just to be very careful with this one, because it's such a vibrant color, I'm just dotting a little bit onto my mixing surface. I find shaking these really important too before you add it to your brush, just to make sure the pigmentation kind of seeps throughout the entire paint. I'm adding that to the brush and then dabbing some of that blue on here as well. We do want to make sure that we lighten up the water that we've drawn. So the last stage before we add the boat is going to be working with a bit of a lighter blue in order to add some contrast and some lightness to the water. So in the corner that's not covered by paint, we're going to add a couple drops of white. Then we're going to keep using the shader brush to mix in the white with a little bit of that indigo blue. The goal is to create a really, really light blue with this white. And then I'm going to dip my brush in the water to keep it a little bit translucent. So you'll notice we have a really light translucent blue here. Then you want to be really careful because this color contrasts a lot with what we have down on the page so far. My brush is sideways and I'm adding some really thin light lines, really lightly on the page. I want to continue the same pattern that we've kept, but I don't want to add these lines too close together. These are kind of like accent lines, and they shouldn't be the main focus. You'll notice that the white, like I talked about at the beginning, really shines through over these darker colors. And that's the great thing about high quality acrylic ink paints, is that they can really, really be layered effectively. So you notice now we have some kind of white cap waves. And again, I really don't want to create straight lines. I'm making sure they're a little bit wavy. What we need to add now is the boat. And so we're going to add the boat and then add some pen to draw attention to the boat and to kind of accent some of the details. For this, you're going to need to do a couple things. First, you want to clean your brush. And so that shader brush that we just used, you want to wash it off in water. You'll notice that now these brushes and the ink paints comes off really, really easily. Now we have a brush that's free of pigmentation and ready to draw or paint, I guess, that boat on top of our scene. However, don't be too hasty. Take about a 5-minute break to let this paint dry. Once it dries, then we can add the boat on top. Have a snack, have a glass of water, come back in 5 minutes, and then we'll keep going. So if you've had a snack, had a drink, you come back and your paint is dry. We're ready to add the boat and then to move on to the final stage of this project. I'm going to use a Daler-Rowney white acrylic ink paint. If you want to use a different color, have my blessing, go for it. But I find a white kind of gives us a nice contrast and is going to form kind of the backbone or the overall shape of the boat. What you want to do here is use the ink dropper on a clean part of your mixing palette. 1, 2, 3, or 4 little drops of paint. And then we're going to draw the hull or the base of the boat. I'm going to do it with a little bit of perspective. And so if you want to do it your own way, go for it. Or follow along with me and we can add a little bit of perspective to this painting. How I'm going to do that is to start with some lines. From about maybe 1/4 of the way across our little seascape here on the top, I'm going to start this line diagonally downwards from there. So you'll see I have a line here, and then I'm kind of going downwards. I'm going to dab my brush again and do another line. I'm not going to make the lines meet, but this one is going to be a little bit less of an angle. So you'll see that these two lines almost would meet, when they just go past the horizon. However, I'm not going to let them meet. I'm going to connect them here. So to do that, I'm going to connect the back of the boat. I do a little bit of a vertical line from that bottom line up to the top one. And then I'm connecting them with some horizontal strokes downwards with the wide side of that brush. You'll notice that there's a little bit of blue shining through, and that's probably because I didn't wait long enough to let the paint dry. But that's all right, we can do another layer on top of this. Once we have this basic shape, what we're going to do is create the prow of the boat, which is going to be coming towards us. So how I'm going to do that is angle my brush the other way, and then draw another line upwards like that. I'm using the side of my brush to kind of fill in that empty space, and we want the prow to arc upwards. So you'll see how right here it's a line that kind of goes down a little bit. We want it to go slightly the other way. So I'm correcting with the side of my brush to make the line go up. And you'll see now we have kind of the basic outline of a boat kind of coming towards us. However, we really do want to be able to see in the boat, because from our perspective, we'd be able to see a little bit of what's inside this boat. And so to do that, I'm adding a little bit more of a line on the top, and then on the side of the brush, curving it backwards. So you see what I did there? I took my brush from this tip of the boat and then drew a line with a slight arc all the way back towards the stern of the boat. The great thing about acrylic ink paints is that you can always correct what you've done, and especially in this project, if you find that your perspective looks off, you can always go back over it to expand the shape, or paint over it with blue and start again. However, we have the basic outline of the hull of the boat, but we want it to be a sailboat. And this is where these brushes really come in handy for creating thin lines. And so I'm going to draw a line right in the middle of the boat, which is about the exact middle of our water section here. Now you want this line to be fairly straight, and you can use a ruler or a very straight-edged item to draw this mast. I'm just going to kind of freehand it, but do whatever feels best to you. Now we have a boat, and we also have a mast on top of it. However, a mast doesn't do really much if it doesn't have a sail, right? And so we're going to add a sail here. And this is going to be a little bit more of a complicated shape, but let's see how it goes. We're going to draw a line here from the mast all the way to the back of the boat, kind of parallel. And then we're going to draw a line down from the top of the ship all the way to the bottom. We want to kind of fill this in with the side of our brush. And it's all right if this takes time. I find kind of dabbing at these shapes really helpful, adding some more white as it's needed. To kind of fill in this triangle. And you'll notice that I tried to make this line parallel to the horizon line. However, it didn't really work out, and that's all right. It's okay if there's a little bit of an arc or a little bit of a sway to the bottom or the sides of the line. We have now our boat, a nice triangle sail, and you can kind of really take it from here however you like when it comes to adding more paint or changing the color of the boat. I kept it in white, but if you want to experiment with different colors, go for it. I'm adding some more white over top of the ship because, as I talked about before, the blue bled through. However, if you want to keep it a little bit of off blue, that's fine as well. At this point of the project, you should have a boat of some shape or size, and it should be all one color, because then we're going to add ink to add some interest, to add some other elements to this boat and some final details. However, once again, we need to let this ink dry before we add black Fineliner pens on top. So maybe grab another snack, grab another drink, and in about 5 minutes, you can kind of return to your sketchbook and add the finishing touches on this drawing. When your boat has dried, you're going to take a Fineliner pen. I'm using a 05 pen, but anyone will do. You want it to be black though, and you want it to be a fine liner. So that means it's usually an archival quality ink that has a really regular and predictable lay down of ink on the page. We're going to start with outlining the sail. And so I'm drawing nice thick lines all the way down here. You'll notice that my lines are a little bit wavy, and that's all right. I think when lines are a little bit too straight, it takes away from some of the character of the drawing. We're going to do the same thing on this side. You'll notice that even though I've let my drawing dry, some of the ink might kind of come up into the pen, and that's all fine as well. We're going to continue this outline, really accenting the wavy shape of the sail. And this is where you can kind of correct any mistakes that you might have made when you've laid down the ink. For example, if this bottom part of the sail is a little bit too straight, you can then draw a little bit into the white to kind of exaggerate that outline. Or if, for example, you've added ink or acrylic paint outside of the sail shape, this is a great way of really highlighting the important or most important shape of the sail. We created a closed off triangle here to show the sail as a separate entity from the mast itself. But now we can highlight the mast. We want to carry down the shape of the mast about, a fingernail down into the boat itself. That's because we're going to make the boat appear a little bit three-dimensional. As we outline the boat, you can see that this is a really great way of making up for mistakes that you might have made when you drew the outline of the boat, such as these little wayward strokes of paint on the outside. You'll see when I kind of draw down the shape, it kind of makes those outside area bits of white just appear like waves on the water. We drew this backside of the boat, but then first we want to carry the line along the top. And then this is where the perspective comes into play, because now we want to draw a curving line all the way back to this corner. So I'm drawing a line that has a little bit of a curve to it before receding back to that back area of the boat. This can be a little bit tricky to do, and it might take a little bit of practice. So if you want to practice on another piece of paper, that's fine as well. But you'll notice that this makes it appear like the boat is a little bit three-dimensional. This is something that's really hard to do with paint, and that's why it's such a cool way to use pen to add detail and interest to your drawings. I'm going to draw down the prow of this boat, but then when we draw this bottom little bit of the boat, we want to make sure we're creating wavy lines. So I'm not drawing the exact outline of white, but more so loose and wavy lines with the pen to make it look like the boat is cutting through water. This means we can have some fun with extending the sail down into the boat itself, and perhaps adding a little bench ahead of the sail and maybe even behind the sail too. Now, if you want to add some texture, using pen is a really great way to do this as well. You can kind of mirror that top line to draw lines that recede back towards the back of the boat. And you'll notice these lines get thinner as they go back to make it appear like they are, receding away from us. You'll notice that the lines I'm drawing are very wiggly, very shaky, and that's fine. The rough outline of these lines, even if they're a little bit dotted, can really be effective in giving the illusion of detail, meaning making it appear like there's detail even when I don't have to draw every single little detail. But you can see how adding these little dotted lines that get smaller and closer together towards the back of the boat can be a really effective way at making it appear like the boat has, wood sides. You can even do the same on the mast. I love to add a little patch, so a little square with some sewing marks around the outside, and perhaps even a flag up top. A wavy line with a bottom wavy line that kind of mirrors that shape. And you'll see now in just about half an hour, we've created a lovely little boat that's floating on some ocean waves. An optional part of this class would be to create a little bit of a perspective. And so I'm mirroring the shape of the boat with my ink pens, very light and loose, dotting out the shape above it, but a kind of a mirror image. And then a loose line receding back to the back of the boat. You can paint over this with white or just keep it with ink pens. But you'll see how quickly we can create a really lovely, vibrant image that's really made more detailed by adding ink. If you have some extra time, we can dig deeper on this project, add some extra details and some other elements to this scene to really give it a sense of space, and to maybe ask some questions about the background behind this scene. First, we can sketch in some background elements that can tell us a little bit more about the world that this boat is floating in. For me, that's going to look like a kind of a unique riverbank. I'm making it taller on the side of the drawing, and then it's kind of receding into the distance, getting smaller and closer to the horizon line. This riverbank is primarily above the half circle we've drawn. And I want to make sure the edges of it don't kind of go past that half circle area. I can add some overhanging grass and maybe some weeds and some snarly old trees to make it kind of an interesting, unique looking scene. It can be really effective to continue this circle shape we have going with some elements right here in the top. And I think clouds would be perfect for this. To draw clouds, I'm starting with this small, kind of a flat base on multiple levels that follows the arch of this hillside. And then I'm drawing very round, uneven, and kind of puffy ridges to this cloud. We can then shade in parts of the top of the cloud very lightly, and then shade in the bottom to make it look as if the bottom of the cloud is facing away from the sun. In this digging deeper segment, you can really see how adding some contrast behind the white boat really gives it a sense of pop and makes it pop into the foreground. As well, extending the circle shape around this composition, I think is a really effective way of framing this central boat. In the next lesson of this workshop, we're going to switch to watercolor. So I'll see you in the next lesson.